Entertainment Safari.
Welcome to Entertainment Safari with Steve and Izzy. I'm Izzy, and that's Steve.
Hi.
Great intro.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Entertainment Safari with Steve and Izzy.
It's good to be back.
I love your opening line every time. Okay, so, Entertainment Safari. So far, we've just covered movies, but that's not all there is when it comes to entertainment. So, today, in honor of the NBA Finals, we are going to talk about a movie, but it's a sports-related movie. We are talking about Adam Sandler's new movie, Hustle.
Hustle is a story about a scout for the 76ers who discovers a talented basketball player named Bo Cruz, whom he believes will get drafted, but who the Sixers management is not completely sold on. And so what you see in the movie is kind of a fallout between Sandler's character and the organization, as he really believes in this underdog story, and it just shows the length that this agent's willing to go through to give his guy a chance to play at the next level.
Absolutely, yeah. Overall, I thought it was a great sports movie, and quite honestly, one of my, if not my top, one of my top basketball movies. It was such a well-rounded and complete piece. I loved it, and I loved that even though it was a Netflix film, we got the opportunity to see it on the big screen.
Yeah, seeing it on the big screen definitely ramped things up, I feel like, especially in some of the opening sequences. Basketball movies tend to have a pretty slow, methodical pace, but this one did not feel slow at any point. I feel like they did a good job pacing throughout the whole movie.
So before we give it our rankings, is there anything else that we need to talk about here as far as the movie goes?
I think basketball movies are very niche-oriented. I think people are tougher on them than they are the majority.
Say, baseball or football movies.
Oh, I think those even have their own criteria, and I feel like if you ask the average person what their favorite baseball movie is, even you're going to get probably 10 different answers. You want to push back on me a little bit on that? Do you feel like
I feel like there's one or two that would get a majority. So yeah, I definitely feel like there's one or two that would edge out. But I agree, there's a lot of baseball and football movies, not so much so with basketball movies. I feel like there aren't as many choices there for basketball.
I can see that. I think that there are definitely a few more baseball movies that would be running in the top mix, if that makes sense.
For sure.
I think Space Jam, Hoosiers, and a few other would be probably the two, I'd say, out of basketball movies that a lot of people would say if they had to pick one.
I agree wholeheartedly.
But like you said, outside, baseball has probably 5 or 6 really good ones.
Right.
That could definitely be in that conversation.
I think The Sandlot's easily one in the conversation there. Moneyball, For the Love of the Game. We're getting sidetracked. We're not talking about baseball here. We're talking about basketball.
Yeah, so I'd say with the basketball movies, maybe you could tell the audience since there is that kind of niche fandom, who should see this movie.
You know, I think if you love sports in general, you will enjoy this movie. If you're not crazy about sports, then you're going to have a tougher time. I love sports. Basketball has never been one of my go-tos, but I still really enjoyed it. But I love sports, baseball and football especially. But just the story, if you enjoy sports, the story is relatable. I think beyond the game of basketball, and even with basketball, they did a really great job. So, I think if you like sports, you're in for a treat here. If you're looking for a good underdog story, someone to root for, someone with a good heart, and just like you're looking for somebody to watch their dreams come true, this is the movie for you.
Yeah, I think that definitely they ramped it up so that they made it very relatable as far as just a human condition point. I would say that this film was very visceral. I think that's one of the positive things about it, and it's also one of the things that I'd be like, as much as it was a great movie, and I think it would definitely be up there in the top basketball movies, I think this is definitely an adult-themed.
For sure. We should say that. If you're watching with your kids, go back to Space Jam. This is not one for anyone younger than high school. I would say high school is probably your minimum there. Anybody younger than that, wouldn't recommend.
But it does, not to scare people away, I think if you're dealing with some very mature high school or junior high kids, and if you were sitting with them and discussing some of the concepts that were going on, and then I think that, not to scare anyone away, I think it could be a good, instructive, and fun time depending on how mature your child was.
Right. If you have a middle school boy who loves basketball and wants to go to the NBA and is pretty mature, this is absolutely the film. They'll love it. But like Steve said, probably watch with them, because there are some more serious themes, but nothing too risque.
Nothing that crosses the line to the point of another movie by Spike Lee, He Got Game. I'd say this kind of balances kind of the structure. You get some really good cheese, and you get some more serious moments. So I think it definitely has that middle ground between basketball movies.
For sure. Now, Steve, before we go in too much further and go into depth here into our analysis of the movie and ask each other some questions, let's give Hustle a rating. Are you prepared to do that?
This was a very emotional movie for me, so I think it's one of those movies I'm probably going to score lower initially, just because the emotional rating for me was so high, so I don't want that to cloud my judgment of the movie until I get to see it more. But absolutely, I'm ready to rate it.
Okay, let's have you go first. I have my rating. What would you give it, Steve?
I would give it a solid 4 hot tamales. I think it did enough to distinguish itself in its genre as a really good movie, definitely above the average movie that you'd see in the genre. I think the replay value with sports movies is always very difficult, so I'm kind of reluctant to give it any higher till I see it a few more times, but I thoroughly enjoyed this film. It had serious moments, it had funny, happy moments. It was a very well-balanced film from start to finish.
I wholeheartedly agree. I too give it 4 hot tamales out of 5. I just felt like it was very well rounded. It had the sports you were looking for. It had the moments off the court that you were looking for, and it made you laugh. It made some of us cry. And if you can do all that in the course of a movie, then I think you're doing pretty good. So I too give it 4 out of 5 hot tamales.
Yeah, and just so the audience knows, I was the one who got emotional, not Elizabeth. Elizabeth kept it together very well, so.
See, I wasn't going to rash out.
Ready for your first question?
Yep.
So, that being said, Elizabeth, what about Adam Sandler's character, Stanley Sugarman, makes you want to root for him? Because that's a tough thing to accomplish in a film, is where someone's kind of on that edge, but you still want things to turn out well for them.
Yeah, I think Adam Sandler plays a very relatable role here. And for me personally, I saw moments of my dad in him. And so I think anytime that you can get the average person to see that, at least for a female, to see her dad or her husband or her boyfriend or something like that, I think that's when you've got them. So kind of the beginning when they're setting up with him traveling and him missing his wife and his daughter, that's kind of when they hooked me. And, I was that daughter at home. Granted, my dad's not an NBA scout, so not on that level, but he did travel a lot for work. And so that kind of got me, and his desire to be home and to do those things and to still reach his goals. So I think that aspect is what hooked me in his journey and what I was rooting for him, that he didn't give up, yet he was still willing to do everything for his wife, which Queen Latifah, and his daughter. So I think that's what got me and why I started rooting for him. Bouncing off your question, my first question for you is about the NBA players. We had several NBA players with key parts in the film and even cameos. But that's one aspect that a lot of times movies like this get criticized for, is people who aren't actors acting. So how would you describe or rate or score the NBA players' acting performances?
Yeah, like you said, that's usually a very difficult thing to assess. I feel like usually the critiques are overboard when they're critiquing athletes, but oftentimes they're also very fair too. So I feel like the performances in this movie, and why even Adam Sandler himself praised Anthony Edwards' acting performance in the film, was because it was very relatable to the culture. If you've ever played an NBA pickup game, which most people haven't, but if you're even a guy on the street and you've played a pickup game, there are guys who will just trash talk your ear off. And some of that's good for the game, where I feel like it's a playful back and forth, and it adds something to the game, and sometimes it can get really intense. And I think they definitely capitalized in that with Anthony Edwards' character, and that's definitely an aspect when you're playing with guys you don't always know that well. So I think, and then you take another performance, you take Julius Erving's performance, Dr. J. You have another kind of ambassador of the game, where you see a totally different side of it, where you see just the history of the game. So I think they definitely balanced two sides of the game, even three, that you usually don't get to see. You get to see the front office, you get to see the more street side of things, and then you also get to see the process that goes into picking these super talented players for the NBA draft. So that's a pretty tall order for a movie to accomplish all those things, and to be able to get that layered approach onto a game which a lot of people know and love. And I mean, you even take into the account the GOAT conversation that goes on in sports. Each generation has a collection of players who they grew up with and they got to see play. So there's that appreciation and there's that history of the game. And that's, I think, what stood out most to me about some of these acting performances is it was very honoring of the game itself. It wasn't about a certain player going, hey, I'm a great actor. It was more about showing different facets of the game of basketball.
I can see that.
Critics, Elizabeth, of sports films are usually also pretty hard on the format of these films. They say to themselves, oh, this movie follows a formula. Do you think the formula nature of this story helps or hurts it in the long run? Like, I'd say the formula for this film is you have an underdog character who is ultimately going to try to get drafted. Do you feel like that formula helps this film, or does it hurt it?
I think for most people, it's going to help it. You're going to have some people who are just... Some of my least favorite people are the people who can't just sit and enjoy a good movie for the sake of enjoying a movie, you know? And so if you have a person like that, then they're going to say it hurts it, obviously. But I think it helps this film because it gives you someone to root for. Do you probably know how it's going to turn out in the end? Yes, but sometimes it's okay to know how it ends. When you watch a rom-com, most of the time you're going to know it ends in either a kiss or a wedding or something, right? But you still watch it for the journey. So I say that yes, it helps it because even though you know exactly what's coming, you're excited for the journey, excited to see, okay, we're going from point A to point Z. How do we get there? And so I think it works for this film, and I think it helps it. One of the things that I noticed in this film, and kind of going off the formula here, is that there was a mix of fiction and nonfiction in the film. In that they obviously used some real basketball players. Some of them were playing themselves. Some of them were not. They used some real game footage, and then they also had some that was clearly scripted. They had some coaches they had that were real coaches, and then they had some that were actors. So how do you think that played out in the film?
I think that's always the challenge of making one of these films, is that line between reality and fiction. Because, like, you take even the story of Rocky, which is a fictional story, there are ties to real life, and the format or template of that was, I think, Rocky Marciano, and maybe one or two other boxers. So I'd say the best sports films sometimes toe that line where it's not quite a biopic, but it's not quite a fiction either. So I think that's a case of the genre where it's kind of like a biopic we saw earlier. I guess it would be later last year with Kurt Warner's Underdog. Where's that line between, oh, we're telling a fictional story about a fictional person like Rocky, or are we doing a biopic featuring this player like Kurt Warner?
Which, if you haven't seen Kurt Warner, The American Underdog Story, highly recommend that one too.
Yeah, I mean, we're suckers for good movies, so I feel like they did a good balance between, because that's another factor that a lot of people don't consider, is even if you get actors to play basketball players, they are not going to be able to do the stunts. Like, there's another movie, Coach Carter, where Samuel L. Jackson plays Coach Carter, and he does a fantastic job, and Channing Tatum's on the team. Channing Tatum is a very good actor, but is he going to be able to do some of the dunks and stunts that, say, they got Anthony Edwards to do in that movie, or they got Juancho Hernandez, who's also in the movie, to do? No, because they... interesting stat was, like, if you get even an average NBA player against someone off the street, the NBA player is going to win like 90% of the time because they have this muscle memory built in.
Right.
So they know the shot selection. They have this muscle memory where they can just do the deals and they don't even have to think about it because they've literally gone through the motions so many times that their arms and legs are able to move pretty seamlessly. Not
to mention their height is normally a factor as well as their genuine athletic ability.
Yeah, I mean, and you see that in this movie. They measure at the combine, they measure athletes' hands, they measure their wingspan, they measure their vertical leap.
Right.
So when you're dealing with all those factors, once again, if you're trying to make a sports movie, you don't necessarily have to have an athlete.
But to make it believable.
But to make it believable, you either have to have you have to limit certain shots, or you have to just have an incredible actor who's able to sell that. And I think the great thing about this movie is they actually get NBA players to play the lead roles, so you actually get to see real footage of what an NBA player could actually do on the court.
Very nice.
Okay, Izzy, the film also showed a lot of background negotiations between the managers, the scouts, and players that usually don't get covered. Do you feel like they balanced these out, or would you have liked to see an actual draft play out in the movie? And also, did they overdo some of the petty people? Because I feel like you definitely run into some petty characters in this movie where sometimes if it's overdone, it's easy to point out, oh, that's overdone. Do you feel like this was reflective of real life, or do you feel like it was overdone, or how did that impact you?
Obviously, with no background knowledge, just, what I've seen on TV, I don't feel like it was overdone, first off, because we have heard stories, and obviously, you've got to take what you see in the news and on TV with a grain of salt, but I think it was accurate. I think when you're in a multi-million-dollar business like the NBA or MLB or NFL, like, you're gonna have those personalities and you're gonna run into those situations because you're dealing with people with big egos, you're dealing with lots of money, and that's not gonna change. So I don't feel like they overdid it. What was the first part of your question again?
I did kind of ask you a double part. Do you feel like they balanced out the themes between the managers, the scouts, and the players? Or do you feel like they focused too much on one of those facets and or do you feel like they had too many facets?
No, I feel like they played it really well. This is comparable to Moneyball, we've said before. And so kind of getting to see that aspect in a different sport was really fun. I feel like I was a little disappointed at first when we didn't see the draft and see how high Bo Cruz was drafted. But looking back on it now, the way they played it and the reveal at the end, no spoilers or anything, but the reveal was very sweet, and it closed the book very nicely. So I see why they didn't do it, and I think if they'd put the whole draft in, it would have been too much, and it would have been overplayed, and I think it would have made the movie longer than it was. Would I be surprised if there were deleted scenes with the draft? No, not at all. But I'm very pleased with the way they did it, and it's, kind of following the formula, but not the formula a little bit in that regard, kind of touching back on your earlier question. So I was really pleased with it, and I think they did a good balance.
And the movie did not drag at all. It played, and then you were like, okay, movie's over.
For sure. I left very satisfied. So, my basketball lover over here played basketball for quite a bit of your lifetime there. Tell me, who was your favorite cameo before we wrap this podcast up?
Like, that's a complicated question, Elizabeth. Are you talking about just a cameo, like a short role, like not outside of the main characters?
Well, no, not necessarily. I'm talking about, because we didn't see a lot of this movie in the theaters. We knew Adam Sandler was in it, but I don't know how much more we knew about it going in. So I would say any of the NBA players I'll count as a cameo, even if they were one of the one or two big stars in the film here. So anybody besides Adam Sandler counts when I say cameo here.
I think definitely as far as cameos, I would probably say Dr. J, simply because I feel like without him, you had a lot of some of the cameos that you figured would definitely be in the movie. I still loved getting to see Kenny and Shaq and some of the NBA announcers and Charles Barkley, but I do feel like those were kind of almost expected in a movie like this. They did a great job, but I think Dr. J's role in the film, and there's definitely a moment, once again, no spoilers, where Dr. J's role
is pivotal.
It's pivotal, and it's definitely shows, I'd say, the best attitudes and the camaraderie of NBA players.
I can see that. Good choice.
Well, our time is about up, but it's been awesome to get to talk to you guys about another movie which was honestly kind of a steal for us. We weren't expecting it. It just kind of showed up, and it was delightful.
We seized the day, and we recommend anyone, if you see movies out in your theater that catches your eye, go support the theaters.
Absolutely. I mean, just getting to see that on the big screen was just such a treat for the start of the summer.
We will talk to you again later on the Entertainment Safari.
Bye.